All right. Welcome to everyone. It's great to have you all joining this evening's event. I'm Paul Lewis, president of the Architectural League and partner at LTL Architects. And it's my distinct pleasure to kick off this much anticipated current work lecture by Toyo Ito. For those of you whose Japanese is a bit rusty, translation will be provided by Noriko Taguchi. And we would not be able to have this event without funding from the Japan Foundation New York, as well as public funds from the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs in partnership with the City Council and the New York State Council on the Arts with the support of the New York State Legislature. And I want to underscore that the Architectural League is dependent upon and defined by its members, all of you whose support helps make this and other programs possible. Thanks also to our longtime program partner, the Irwin S. Channing School of Architecture at the Cooper Union, and we certainly look forward to at least a partial return to the Great Hall, to their Great Hall this fall. And finally, thanks to our program director, Ann Rieselbach, and program manager, Katarina Flaxman, for curating this ambitious and diverse current work lecture series, which is examining overlooked systems that shape the built environment, reimagining places marked by racism, neglect, and environmental degradation. So in some ways, tonight is a fitting celebratory final event to this series. As we all know, Zoom has its well-documented fatigue, but tonight's event is really an affirmation of its qualities to connect a very large collective of people over very long distances. So I am thrilled that Toyo Ito is here to speak with us tonight. Simply put, he is one of the most influential and thought-provoking architects in the world. And I'm also equally pleased to welcome architect and educator Toshiko Mori, who will not only introduce the lecture, but will engage our speaker in a subsequent conversation and Q&A. Toshiko is Robert P. Hubbard Professor in Practice of Architecture at Harvard University GSD and co-founder of Vision Arc. She is a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and a member of the American Academy of Arts and Letters, and recently received a well-deserved Topaz Medallion for Excellence in Architectural Education. So it's quite an honor to have these fantastic architects together in dialogue as both are transforming what the agency of an architect could and should be. So Toshiko, I turn it over to you. Welcome.
Paul, thank you very much for your invitation, and thank you so much for inviting me to be introducing Toyo Ito, and also occasion to be able to moderate and in dialogue with this discussion. Good evening to people in New York, and good morning to Ito-san and Takiguchi-san in Tokyo. I'm very happy and honored to be introducing Toyo Ito to the audience of Architectural League of New York tonight. I have long admired his work and his position as an architect who has spoken out publicly as a public intellectual at critical moments in our time, which witnessed series of crises, environmental, economical, societal, and medical. In Pritzker Prize jury citation, Toyo Ito is described as, quote, a professional of unique talent. He is dedicated to the process of discovery that comes from seeing the opportunities that lie in each commission and each site, end of quote. The word innovation exists to describe his mode of work. He combines technical sophistication with structural ingenuity and masterful detailing of materials in arriving at a clear and elegant formal solutions. The degree of resolution is so refined that at the end, no one can detect the noise of technology. Instead, inhabitants are surrounded by generous atmosphere where they experience freedom and spatial empowerment, allowing relaxing and informal activities to take place so that it is the life that comes alive while his architecture generously envelopes these precious and fragile moments in people's lives. In his architecture, sensual experience, lightness, and luminosity define his work. In definitive command of authorship, an iconic and artistic expression of his architecture, his mastery of space always went beyond form making. Imbued with his humanity, space becomes joyous, peaceful, and harmonious. As an architect of international stature, he just doesn't sit on his laurels. As a humanist architect and activist, at the time of 2011 Tohoku earthquake, he voluntarily proposed Home for All projects in collaboration with younger generation of architects. When a natural disaster hits and all of the livelihood and context that support built environment is gone, what would an architect do? A naive intellectual discourse cannot hold a candle against everybody's struggle to survive. This action is a result of his long and considerate reflections on the role of architecture and architects in contemporary society. One can witness in each one of his projects that he is pushing the limit of architecture in typology, programming, and technology, material use, always throwing different challenges that we need to confront in our time. Even before the earthquake of 2011, he has started his Omishima projects, exploring potential of architecture in rural and underpopulated areas, also started the idea of starting his own school, Toshiko. In other words, he's an architect cognizant of the fact that he's making impacts on the history of architectural discourse and aware that he can change its course by proposing projects that become manifestos. Younger generations of architects in Japan is aware of his stance and consider him to be the conscience of contemporary architecture. His gentle demeanor and rational elocution and often disguises sharp criticism embedded in them against cities and buildings that continue to hold on to the industrial and economic motive in disregard for lives of inhabitants and its balanced relationship to nature. Last summer, despite pandemic, he finished and published a definitive bilingual monograph, Toyo Architecture as Sensation, soon to be available on our site. Tonight, it is a significant moment to welcome Toyo Ito to the New York audience as the last speaker of a current work series. Tonight, the audience becomes more global than local because of virtual format. After experiencing the worst situation here in New York in COVID pandemic, we have finally reopened New York City, but at the same time, we are all reflecting on how to reposition ourselves. As Toyo Ito mentioned in his interview with Nicholas Hirsch, there is no point in building architecture if you do not constantly redefine, question, and change as architect. Toyo Ito will deliver his lecture tonight in Japanese, and Ms. Noriko Takiguchi will translate. She's on her own a well-known journalist who has written a book on observing his work and activities. Tonight's lecture is titled Rethinking Architecture from Modernism. Please welcome Toyo Ito. どうもありがとうございました。Thank you so much. 素晴らしい講演で、もう びっくりしていますし、もちろん伊藤先生のお話ですから、これだけ良いお話を聞いてよかったと思います。I was just saying thank you to Toyo Ito for incredible lecture, and of course we could expect nothing less than this ambitious and amazing lecture. And because we are approaching the end of our lecture, I have just few questions to ask, and I only see one question from the audience. And the first one, I would ask my question in English. I will ask him in Japanese. So, no, I will ask him in Japanese first. So it will give him a time to think about it while I'm translating my questions to you in English. And Ms. Takiguchi will translate his answer. So, さっきのお話の2つの水ということなんですけれど、伊藤先生の作品を見ていれば、3つ目の水があるということに気がついたんです。ということは、人々の交流する、そういう川を作ってあげる、その流れができる水を作る建築を作っていらっしゃるなっていうふうに感じたんですけれど、それはやはり3つ目の水と感じて、社交性っていうことですね。大衆のシアターの賑わいがあったり、みんなの家の中でみんなが集まったりとか、そういう場を作ってあげて、岐阜のみんなの森など、その人々が流れることのできる、その水の流れを作ってあげるっていうことが建築家の役割じゃないかということを感じたんですけれど、どうでしょうか。So my question while he's thinking about answer is that I noticed that in this proposal for two different kinds of water, I noticed that in fact he actually makes two types of water in his architecture which is an interaction of people, the social, the water which creates a fluidity between interaction of people, and they become like a river and a flow that makes it possible for people to meet and interact. This idea of socialization is so essential to the community making. It seems to be what I took away from his architecture.
はい、はい、とてもありがたい質問なんですけれども、15年ばかり前に東京の美術館で展覧会を個展を開いた時に一つの部屋だけこう床を波打たせるようなことをしてみたんですね。そうすると子どもはその部屋に入った途端に走り出す。そして、大人たちも、必ずどこかにその高いところに、腰を下ろす、座り込むわけですね。つまりちょっとその建築の中で自然に近いような、自然を感じさせるような場所を作ると、人々は大変リラックスできる。ということを感じて、私は最近の建築ではできるだけ、その壁によって部屋を区切らずに自然の中にいるような空間を作り出したい。これは人工的な空間なんですけれども、自然の中にいるような空間を作り出したいと考えて、できるだけ壁を少なくし、交流できるような、流れていくような流動的な空間を作りたいと考えてきました。そのことが、人々にとって、かなりリラックスして、交流を図れるような空間になっているのではないかと考えております。
So I appreciate your question very much. About 15 years ago, I had an exhibition in a museum in Tokyo. And actually, I made an undulating floor in one of the rooms. And what I found is that as soon as kids see this space, they come in running. And then adults also find an uncomfortable spot for them to sit on. So what I think is that if you a little bit manipulate what the architecture is in the space, and if it's a little bit similar to what the nature is, people always find a spot to relax. So in my recent works in architecture, I try not to divide the spaces with walls, but to create a flowing space, just as in nature. Although it is an artificial space, but I try to create a natural space, and I hope that the space will foster people to flow and to communicate. So the space that make people relax will foster communications and interactions among people.
Thank you so much. それ次の質問なんですけど、木造建築についてなんですけれど、今日見せていただいた作品の中では、木造建築が多くて、それは割と最近のことではないかと思うんですけれど、それを元にしてもともと考えてらしたことかもしれないし、今木造建築に注目されているきっかけはどういうことでしょうということと、もう一つはオーディエンスからの質問で、例えば日本の建築家、若手の建築家、この人は特に石井和弘さんのCO2 コミュニティのことなど言ってるんですけれど、そういう試作品があったのですけれど、その時に比べて何か進化している様子は見られますかっていうことなんですね。So I'm asking him about wood architecture, which he has shown some examples, which has been quite a new tendency for him. He's better known for steel and concrete. And I was asking what would be his motive for inspiration for starting to focus on wood. And I'm also included the questions from Mr. Larry Richards about your question about experimentation by Kazuhiro Ishii on CO2 community, and how if he sees any progress of cultural architectural continuity from those periods.
はい、3.11の時に、被災地に何度も足を運んで、今まで、自分は都市の建築のことばかりを考えていたなと。日本にはまだたくさんその漁業や農業に関わっている人たちがいて、その人たちは都市の建築とはあまり関わりのない、木の家に長く暮らして木に親しんできた、自然にも親しんできた、そういうことを感じたときに、みんなの家を木造で作ってみると、涙を流して喜んでくれるんですね。それでやはり日本人のDNA の中にはまだ木というものに対する離れがたいシンパシーがあるんだということを強く感じました。そして、石井和弘さんは私も親しくしておりましたけれども、彼が作っていた時代と比べるとかなり技術的に進化した新しい木造建築が、火災にあっても大丈夫だということが証明され、また大きなスパンの大規模な建築物を作ることができるようになった。特にシンガポールのプロジェクトでは話しませんでしたけれども CLT とか LVL といったような新しい木の柱あるいは まあ、合板の厚いものですね、によって、大きな木構造ができるようになってきたというような、まあ、そういったことがまあ、非常に影響をしていると思います。
Okay. So at the time, after the 3/11 disaster, I visited this Tohoku area many times. And that made me realize that I have been majorly dealing with architecture in cities. And if I looked at the people, the local residents there, they are either farmers or fishers, and they have nothing to do with city architecture. And they had been living in the wooden houses, and they have a very close relationship to wood and nature. And after we built the home for all houses for the local people, they were almost crying to be re-experiencing their wooden environment. And I really realized that in our Japanese DNA, there's this undividable sympathy to wood. That's the wood material that I'm the reason why I'm working with it. Now about Kazuhiro Ishii, whom I was friend with. Since his time, we have seen a lot of technological advancement in wood. There are wood that withstand fire, and wood structure can have bigger spans now. There are new materials called CLT or LVL, and there are also laminated thick wooden panels. So there are a lot that we can do now with the wood material.
それでは、最後のもう時間になりましたけど、最後一つだけオーディエンスの質問をちょっとまとめてお願いしたいと思うんです。この形についていろいろな構造的な形で随分イノベーションがあったのではないかということで、そのいろいろな特にタイチュンシアターとか、そして岐阜の屋根の形とか、それはどこからインスピレーションが入っているのかということと、それから屋根の特に岐阜の方ですけれど、雪とか雨の処理がどうなっているかということと、そしてもう一人、ベス・ワインスタインという人が20年前ぐらいのチョロンというダンスパフォーマンスの、これは山崎浩太さんの、デザインですね。セットのデザインじゃなかったと思うんですけれど、何かそれとつながっている感じがして、自然の話を、自然のを抽象的にとっているものとか、その環境のことについて、こうつながりがあるんではないかというような質問があります。So I'm asking, putting all your questions together to try to make the last questions to Mr. Ito, in which there's a lot of questions about how his forms are inspired by perhaps forms of nature. How is that structural innovation possible? How does the practicality of rain or snow that's happening? And then also Weinstein's question about his designs for Kota Yamazaki's dance performance, Cholon, in which it's inspired by nature, the theme of nature, and also the idea of environment. Isn't there that kind of thread that's actually continuous for 20 years?
はい。まず山崎浩太さんのダンスパフォーマンスでは、何本かの布で、上から吊られたチューブの間で、彼がダンスをするという舞台をデザインいたしました。 これは仙台メディアテックの後だったということも影響していると思いますが、仙台でもこう自然の中にいるような木の木立の間にいるようなイメージを描いておりましたので、そのような自然のイメージとどこかで山崎さんの、舞台がつながっているのではないかと思います。それからまたその仙台では垂直方向のチューブだけだったんですけれども、それを水平にもつなげようとしたのが台湾のプロジェクトの構造で、今日は詳しくお話できませんでしたが、大きく見るとチューブ状のフレームで、なんて言ったらいいですかね、の構造体ができている。つまり、例えば水戸の木を10号に組んだようなものがチューブで、コンクリートのチューブで組まれているというふうに考えていただければいいかと思います。このような構造体、あるいは岐阜のその屋根ですね、これも、いずれも優れた構造のエンジニアとのコラボレーションによって、フィードバックを繰り返しながら出てきたものであって、大変構造的な構造的なイメージといいますか、構造的な構造化からの提案との共同によって生まれてきたと考えられると思います。
Okay, so first about Kota Yamazaki's performance. This was probably because it was a time right after completing the Sendai Mediatek that I made a tube of fabric in which Kota danced. Sendai Mediatek was also a space where you are almost like walking in the forest with in between the tubes. So if you got a sense that the sense of nature exists in Kota's performance, and that is correct in a way. And about the Taichu structure, theater structure, the Sendai Mediatek, in the Sendai Mediatek project, the tubes were built only vertically. But in Taichu, we tried to have these tubes in the horizontal direction too. So the Taichu is actually made of frames made of tubes as a structure. The whole structure is made of tube-like frames. You saw in my Mito Civic Hall the wood structure, where the wood runs both vertical and horizontal in Niagara wooden structure. You can imagine those tubes are replaced, those woods are replaced by tubes. That's how the Taichu whole structure is built. This kind of innovation in structure, as well as the roof in Gifu, undulating roof, that is only made possible with collaboration with talented structural engineers. We proposed one thing, and they gave us some feedback, and we were able to bring this structural image to an architecture by going through this great collaboration.
Well,
Thank you. I think the time is up. So
yeah.
that's the
Well,
last question.
I get the pleasure on behalf of the league to offer a concluding thank you. So, and certainly thank you, Toyo Ito, for taking the time to present from Tokyo, no less, this fantastic work. And thank you, Toshiko Mori, for this intriguing discussion and your introduction. And thank you to the Japan Foundation New York for helping make this possible. And thank you all. Good morning for some of you, good afternoon for some others, good evening for some, and I guess for some of you, good night. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
森さん、滝口さん、ありがとうございました。
ありがとうございました。お疲れ様でした。
お疲れ様でした。ありがとうご
ありがとう
ざいました。
ございました。
本当にありがとうございました。素晴らしいでした。
ありがとうございました。
はい。